Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Talking Davos from the studios here in Davos. We have a very special guest, a professor of management and psychology at the Wharton School in the University of Pennsylvania, Adam Grant, who is also the of author of the new book, Originals, which is going to be released very soon. And he's the author of Give and Take, recently, which was published earlier this year. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's such a pleasure to have you. And I've had the opportunity and honor of engaging with you in the past and know that at the core of what you do, it's how we can be better leaders, more effective leaders, and how we can inspire others to do the same. You're here at Davos, there are all these leaders around. Could you speak to your experience in the last few days?
Yeah, it's been an amazing week. There's so many fascinating people and conversations here. The most interesting thing to me is how many leaders are shifting their way of thinking. So most of the leaders I've worked with over my career try to make decisions based on intuition. They say, look, I have a lot of experience, I go from my gut. And I think that's starting to change dramatically. We're seeing more and more leaders say, I want to know what the evidence says. I need good data, and then I can make better decisions. So I think that's probably a good sign.
Good data.
That's quite interesting. And your work focuses a lot on success, work motivation, helping and giving behaviors. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are afraid to help others because they think that will sacrifice their success. So I've ended up dividing the world into givers, takers, and matchers. And basically, givers are the people who enjoy helping others and often do it with no strings attached. Takers are the people who are all about me. I'm trying to get as much as I can and not give anything back unless I have to. And most people kind of play it safe in the middle of that, and they operate as matchers. Matchers are people who try to keep an even balance of give and take, quid pro quo. I'll do something for you if you do something for me. And I was curious about how these different groups actually performed in the workplace. So got data from lots of different jobs. We had engineers tracking their productivity, medical students looking at their grades, salespeople measuring their revenue. And consistently, the worst performers were the givers. The engineers who did more favors than they got back were so busy doing other people's jobs, they ran out of time and energy to get their own work done. The medical students who really loved to help others were more likely to fail in their classes because they were spending all their time teaching their friends stuff they already knew as opposed to learning new things. And then the salespeople too, who were really generous, brought in the lowest revenue because they were constantly helping their customers in ways that didn't drive the bottom line. So a lot of people say it's really dangerous to be a giver. But then you ask, who are the best performers? And it turns out it's not the takers or the matchers, the givers are on the top too. So generosity can sink your career or accelerate it.
That's quite interesting. And what, according to you, is success?
I think success is really about achieving your goals. And I think it's short-sighted to say, I will succeed if I only hit my own targets. I think your goals ought to include making other people more successful.
And like recently, there are a lot of new leadership models that are emerging. For example, the one that we see in Zappos, self-governance is becoming a recurring theme in all discussions. Does it actually increase the motivation of people with this emergence of new models? Does it change the way people come to work, the way they get motivated? Do you see any differences?
Yeah, I would say it can. It doesn't always work, right? So self-management is really hard to implement. And you need to make sure that people share the values of the organization, that there's some kind of alignment and identification with the common mission. If you do that well, people love having autonomy, right? If you can make choices about what you do, where you do it, when you do it, who you get to work with, of course you're going to get to customize the job to make it more of what you want, as opposed to what your boss handed to you. So I think there's a lot of promise there, but you have to be careful about how you navigate it.
Wow. Here at Davos in the last days, I think we've had quite interesting sessions of meditation on reaching your peak performance by being more mindful, focusing on your core. It seems that there is also that shift in really going inwards in order to explore more what could be on the outside. Could you speak to that in the context of leadership?
Yeah, I can. So I wrote an op-ed recently on ending the meditation madness. And it was actually something in part inspired by my experience at Davos last year, which was there are CEOs coming out of the closet as meditators, to quote Ariana Huffington. Constantly people saying, look, the most important part of my success is meditation. So I started wondering, well, why do we meditate? We meditate, most of us at least, to reduce stress or to become more mindful. If you actually look at the evidence, meditation is one route to those goals, but it's not the only one. So you can reduce stress by sleeping more, by exercising, right? You don't have to meditate. Similarly, if you want to become more mindful, you don't have to sit around just paying attention to your breathing. you can take all sorts of other steps. One of my favorites is changing your use of the word is to could be. And when you do that, one of the things you start to do is you question your environment more, you pay more attention to the present, and that actually gets you into a more mindful state. I have nothing against meditation, but I think we should be really careful about shoving it down people's throats and saying, if you do not meditate, you cannot be mindful.
Wow, I like it. That's really interesting, even for myself. Perhaps on that topic of, there's this question that comes up again and again. What makes a leader? Is one born a leader? Does one learn to be a leader by being more mindful, exercising more, being more balanced? What is leadership?
Yes, to all of the above. So what is leadership? I'll start there. I would say my favorite definition of leadership is it's influencing other people to achieve a common goal. So that means there has to be a collective purpose and you have to have followers. I think the leaders born versus made question is probably the wrong question. It's something we debate a lot.
Yes.
But if you look at the past half century of research, we know that some people start out with more natural leadership capabilities than others. We also know that it's not at all hard to teach and learn. And so you could say, look, we can assume that some people are going to be gifted at it right from the start. Others are going to require a little bit more practice. But I think the practice usually comes from a couple things. One is getting lots of feedback. It's a big red flag for me when I work with leaders who don't actually have people criticize them and who are unwilling to hear the concerns that other people have and not that open about their own challenges and weaknesses and areas for development. And two is actually learning from really bad examples. So we've all been inspired by great leaders, but oftentimes the negative impact of a bad leader is stronger than the positive impact of a good leader. And very frequently, you work for somebody really terrible and you look at that person and say, I never, ever want to be like that.
Yes.
And that can actually tilt you in a more positive direction.
Wow.
Correct.
One last question for me, perhaps. You started the conversation saying that there's a shift and there's people are perhaps being less about the gut feeling but more about the data. Can you speak to some of the data that you refer to?
Sure. So hiring is a great example. One of the most important decisions leaders make, maybe the most important decision, is who they hire and let into their organization. And we used to see many leaders saying, look, I'm going to do an interview, I'm going to ask whatever questions come to mind, and then I'm going to know who the best candidate is. Well, a standard interview, if you were to take 100 people and have a manager or leader rank them in order from best to worst performers, and then you track their actual performance, you'll get somewhere between 1 and 2 of those people in the right spot, which is awful. It's like a monkey throwing darts, basically. So if you decide to take a little bit of data, you can improve your interview predictive validity dramatically. First thing you do is you structure your interview. And that means every candidate gets the exact same questions, and you have actually a scoring key to try to compare what constitutes a good answer, bad answer, et cetera. Secondly, you try to get simulation data. So you figure out what are the tasks that are key to this job, and then you give candidates a chance to do those tasks and look at how well they do them, what kind of knowledge, skills, motivation do they bring to the table. And then third, you say, okay, maybe if they have any relevant past performance in a job like this, we should get samples of that. So we shouldn't just collect their resume, we should collect a report they've written, a presentation they've done, so we can really get a window into how they behave, as opposed to just how they present themselves in an interview. And that's a great example of we're seeing more and more organizations shift to that kind of evidence-based interview.
Interesting.
One of the themes of this year's annual meeting is Fourth Industrial Revolution. How do you see the shift happening in the workplace in the future?
I think it's really hard to predict, right? It's very easy for us to say, here's what's going to happen 5-10 years down the road. We never get held accountable for those predictions. I would say the most compelling argument that I've heard is from George Anders, who basically argues that the jobs that are going to be most important and have the fastest growth over the next decade are going to be jobs that require empathy. Because it's very difficult to automate concern for other people and deep understanding for clients, for colleagues, for other stakeholders that you might interact with. And so I think we're probably going to see increasing emphasis on how well you can really connect with other people, understand what they want, and figure out how to help them.
Connect with other people, show empathy, figure out what they want. Those are some of the things that Professor Adam Grant suggests to all of you young people who are watching this show, live from the studios in Davos, #ShapingDavos. Stay tuned for our next guest.